Hi, my name is Kelly Wang, a PhD student at Northeastern University. I'm here to explain our paper, Counting Cards, Investigating Personal Disclosure and Boundary Management in Transformative Fandom. Transformative fandom refers to the community of fans engaged in creating, sharing, and discussing fan works, such as fan fiction or fan art, that transform existing media. A fan might rewrite the Avengers to be Starbucks employees, or they might ship characters, imagining them to be romantically involved, regardless of whether that occurs in the original work. Fandom also allows people to write their own representation into a mainstream work. If you want to make everyone gay in your fan works, you can, and so it's no surprise that transformative fandom can be very queer as well. Transformative fandom is a long-lived community that hinges on participation. How are you going to enjoy any fan works if no one shares any? However, fans also have acute privacy concerns. Prior work has found that being in fandom can lead to being misunderstood, judged, or harassed by non-fans, which could even lead to job or relationship loss. Fans may therefore self-censor to keep their fan identity separate from their real-world identity, and they can also have nuanced discussions of norms around sharing, archiving, and deleting content. Our study is centered around a phenomenon that has gained traction in some online transformative fandom spaces. Profiles might include a link to a card, a popular single-serving website where fans introduce themselves. This is an example Twitter profile made by our research group, where our example user, Ian, has linked to his own card in the leak section of his profile. Importantly, these websites are highly customizable and allow the user to get around the 160 character limit of Twitter bios. They're still publicly visible, however, just like the other information in Ian's profile. Here's an example illustrating how a typical card might be structured. They often include various demographic information like age, queer identities, languages, and time zone. A before you follow section that lists details that Ian thinks you should know before following her account. A do not interact section that lists people that Ian would like to prohibit from following her or otherwise interacting with her. And a section that lists the fandoms Ian is in or her favorite characters or ships. With our previous discussion of privacy concerns, you might notice that this card includes some potentially sensitive information that could be abused by a malicious actor. In addition to being a fan, there are also disclosures of queerness, and either identity can make Ian the subject of online harassment, or raise the stakes should Ian's fan account get connected to his legal name. One could also be nervous about whether malicious actors would actually follow the rules established in these cards, or if they might instead weaponize this information in the name of harassing Ian. Given this, we were curious, and I hope you're also curious, what kinds of disclosures exist, why they exist, and how they relate to privacy practices and norms. Looking ahead to the rest of the talk, I want to lay out the high-level results of our paper and what I hope to convince you of today. First, that cards overwhelmingly disclose sensitive information with potential for abuse. Second, that these disclosures communicate shared norms and values. And finally, to tie it all together, that these norms and values are what enabled the sensitive disclosures to happen in the first place, outlining first steps towards a theory of collective privacy that builds on prior privacy theory. First, we collected and analyzed cards to understand these disclosures. We identified fans on Twitter with 1,000 to 10,000 followers by finding posts with hashtags associated with various fandoms. We accessed their profiles, their followers' profiles, and their followers' profiles to see if these profiles contained the card URL in their link or bio field. And we crawled these card websites to collect their text in raw HTML. In total, we collected 5,252 cards. Reviewing our dataset, we noticed that these cards generally fell within one of three categories. Artist cards, describing terms for commissioning art from the user, estimated to be about 22% of our dataset. Organization cards, representing multiple fans collaboratively working on a project together, which were relatively rare, though we did not have a reliable way to quantify their prevalence. And personal cards, which served as an extended introduction of the user and composed the majority of our datasets. These largely followed the structure of the example from earlier. Our analysis focused on the disclosures that exist in the identity, DNI, and BYF sections of these personal cards. First, we hand-coded our dataset to identify where the identity sections were, yielding 69.7% of cards with exactly one identity section. We analyzed the disclosures of age, pronouns, gender-related information, sexual and romantic orientation, and disability within these identity sections, though for the sake of time, I will only discuss the first three. One common disclosure was age. We found that 81.5% of identity sections disclosed age, of which 78.7% disclosed their exact age instead of more vague terminology like adult or between 18 and 20. Using these exact age disclosures, we produced a histogram describing the age of this subset of our sample, revealing that it skews quite young. Our dataset includes a large number of minors, bumping up against and even going below the minimum age requirement of the platform. In fact, of those who disclose any age information, a bit over 40% disclose that they were minors. Thus, not only are many people sharing their age, but they often disclose exact age, which could be combined with other disclosures to re-identify a user, and many of these users are teenagers who have additional risks and vulnerabilities. We also examined disclosures of pronouns, which are even more prevalent than age disclosures. Here we found that the second most common pronoun set was they/them pronouns, and many list multiple pronoun sets, which are intentionally double counted on the chart. So someone with she/they pronouns would be in both the she/her column and they/them column. In fact, 68% of people who disclose pronouns used pronouns other than strictly he, him, or she, her, which is strongly associated with queerness. Furthermore, a surprisingly large chunk of the pronouns we found included neopronouns or its pronouns. Neopronouns are neologisms that some within the queer community might enjoy using, such as the ze/them pronouns that Ian listed. And both the usage of neopronouns and the usage of its pronouns can be controversial even within the trans and non-binary community, making it surprising that they're being disclosed in hundreds of cards. We saw the same pattern when we analyzed gender-related disclosures. Less cards disclose this kind of information, which in our analysis includes gender identity, transness, and other related terms. Pronouns provide a directly practical use in dictating how others should refer to you, which might explain the disclosure discrepancy. But we can observe on this chart a wide variety of language that describe gender identity in complex ways, which past work on language in queer online communities notes can be a mode of challenging hegemonic identity discourses. For example, these are gender labels we include in the gender fluid column, which describes a specific experience of being gender fluid. And on the other hand, all of these gender labels lie outside of mainstream identity discourse. Called xenogenders, these describe gender as analogous to a concept besides masculinity or femininity, such as cats, vampires, or stars. Similar to neopronouns, xenogenders can be quite controversial within the trans non-binary community, implying a very real threat of conflict. And conflict can also arise over other gender identities that appear on our charts. So, given that these disclosures can render users vulnerable to harassers both outside and inside the queer community, why do these disclosures exist? I want to assert that a major function of these disclosures is to communicate norms and values, partially answering the reason for their existence. For example, if a community is composed of others disclosing similar identity labels, you can guess that your identities will be welcome too. However, identity markers can only do so much. You might also want to assert norms and values that are not implied by your identities. This is where DNI, or Do Not Interact lists, come in. 50% of our dataset had a DNI list, stating that certain types of people are not allowed to interact with them. Looking at the example from Ian's card, this often includes people who are discriminatory and even assumed to be basic DNI criteria that is tightly understood throughout the community. This language, racist and homophobic, seems to imply hostility towards such prejudice, which is perceived to be a shared hostility. DNIs might also include people outside the age range you want to interact with, such as people within a few years of your own age, which illustrates the practical use of the age disclosures we saw earlier. And finally, DNIs might include fans with certain opinions, such as the assertion here that some fans have problematic ships, which in this example Ian does not want to interact with. This implies that Z disagrees with such fans and does not hold such opinions herself. Taking keywords that we saw frequently in our sample, we counted the frequency of such terms in this chart. We can see that these commonly contained a lot of morally strong language, for example, racist or transphobe, as well as many age restrictions. We also found that DNIs used to indicate not wanting NSFW content. On the other hand, BYF or before you follow lists, which are just slightly less prevalent than DNI sections, seem to have a very different purpose. Looking at the example from Ian's card again, this is phrased in a much more friendly way and can contain information about the content the user normally tweets, norms about how the user uses platform features, and how the user would like to interact with others. For instance, Ian's card tells us that he tweets primarily about the show Breaking Bad, which will usually include spoiler warnings and may include 18+ content. He invites others to talk to him liberally and requests that those who want to follow him first soft block, which is a method of forcing Ian to unfollow their account without notifying him. These patterns are reflected in this chart, where we again did counts of cards with commonly observed keywords. What's interesting here is the accommodating nature of these statements. Actions like including spoiler warnings or tone indicators, or even just a warning that they don't do these things, exist primarily to be considerate to others. And phrases like let me know signal that the user is willing to be more accommodating if needed. Overall, the card sections we discussed have the effect of communicating this is a space with a young and queer culture, which is accommodating, inclusive, and will not hesitate to eject bigots from their space. Even though none of the cards speak for the community as a whole, they construct a shared perception together. Additionally, we may recall that one's immediate Twitter community is made up of their follower network, meaning that users would be able to individually curate their surrounding community and potentially make sure that they are of a similar age, share certain identities, hold the same opinions on contentious topics, or accommodate others in certain ways. Though we might be anxious about the insularity of doing so, we might also connect this to the fact that past work found Tumblr, a similar social platform, to provide an important space where young queer users can exist without needing to explain their identities. This leads to the last thing I want to argue, that the communication of norms and values actually works to enable sensitive disclosures, prompting a new theory of collective privacy. To consider why the users represented in our sample are comfortable making these vulnerable disclosures, we can look to privacy scholarship. We can recall that situations does not fit one common idea of privacy, that you have privacy when you keep information secret. All this information is open to anyone on Twitter, which can certainly include unintended audiences. Nussbaum's theory of contextual integrity provides a different perspective, and the privacy might exist when information flows according to expected contextual norms. For example, if you share your financial information with someone who's selling you something, you expect them to follow certain norms governing this interaction. If information is not distributed in a way you expect, privacy is violated. You might see the explicit articulation of norms in DNI and BYF lists as establishing such norms, but this is complicated by the unenforceability of DNIs. If taken at face value, the parameters of these norms include categories such as racist or homophobic, which relies on racist or homophobic people sorting themselves into those categories and following the instructions in the card. Instead, we want to focus on how disclosures assure readers of common norms and values, which connects to Waldman's notion of privacy as trust. He suggests that sharing is enabled by a safe, trusting environment, which is what provides a sense of privacy. We propose that these disclosures play a key role in constructing this. We propose that the prevalence of sensitive disclosures within our dataset can be explained by the following mechanism. First, as we've seen from the results of our study, personal disclosures and boundary setting by group members construct and update community norms and values, such as emphasizing inclusivity or accommodations. This creates an environment of trust, as it promises favorable future behavior. This person will enforce a welcoming safe space, and shared values, opinions, or identities also make it likely that their actions will be favorable. Thus, despite the fact that others in the community may start out as strangers, the environment of trust creates enough safety to make personal disclosures and expose vulnerabilities via boundary setting, following the logic of Waldman's privacy as trust, which feeds into the first part of the loop. To illustrate how this works from the perspective of a fan, imagine being a fan that wants to post about their favorite ship. You would ideally want to connect with other fans who like the ship, as displayed on the right, while avoiding people who would harass you for this post, as displayed on the left. You might even want to avoid people who won't necessarily be unsafe for you, but would make you justify yourself, which could be an unpleasant or taxing experience, distracting from how fandom is where you go to enjoy yourself. Unfortunately, however, it isn't so simple to follow these parameters, as Twitter is full of strangers. Perhaps you want to post in public to reach other fans, but how will you know you'll reach your intended audience while avoiding others? In this potentially sensitive scenario, disclosure requires a way to trust the audience. The benefit of disclosures within these cards is that a sense of collective privacy is achieved, where you can post to a group of people that signal favorable norms and values. Our theory is only based on the results from our study, and thus isn't validated by other case studies, but I want to end on some provocations for thinking further about such a theory of collective privacy. I've discussed how this sense of privacy seems to alter the benefit-risk calculation of disclosure, allowing members of Transformative Fandom, at least within our dataset, to engage in an abundance of sharing. Sharing can be beneficial and in fact essential to a community, but one might wonder if this feeling of trust could exist without an actual decrease of risk. If so, I believe we must acknowledge both the indispensable value of collective privacy and the potential it has to bring a false sense of security. Relatedly, I would like HCI researchers to consider what it would look like to design for building or preserving collective privacy, and now that we can better identify it, where we might already maintain or destroy collective privacy in our designs. Artificially maintaining or destroying collective privacy can have complex consequences for the well-being of users, which HCI has a responsibility to carefully consider. Thank you.